bringing it back real quick to when we were talking about supernatural experiences bearing fruit. There's one particular encounter with the supernatural with God that you had in India that I would love for you to share with us, and it relates to preaching to I believe it was Hindus out in India, and specifically with the deaf. So can you tell us what happened in that encounter?
I was in Kumbakonam, India, and I was told that I was the first Western missionary to hold an outdoor meeting in that city. And we had quite a few people gathered. It was, I don't know, a crowd of maybe 5,000 people. A lot of them were sitting on a wall that was around the field where I was at, and some were sitting on roofs of buildings outside the wall. And the inside was just crammed with people. And I preached for about an hour to a majority of Hindu people. I believe most of the crowd that gathered that day was of a Hindu mindset. And there were a lot of Christians there too. But I still felt this enormous pressure against me. It was like I was being choked the whole time by the demonic infestation of the atmosphere because I was surrounded by 7 huge Hindu temples that could house thousands of worshipers. The biggest temple, they said, could house 20,000 worshipers at one time. And there was a labyrinth of underground tunnels from one Hindu temple to the other. And you'd walk 50 feet down through that tunnel and come to an alcove where there's a deity, an image, and fruits and flowers and incense being offered up to that deity, and then walk another 50 yards or 50 feet and another little alcove. And so I'm surrounded with this multiplicity of gods and goddesses. And there's a huge baptismal pool in the center of the city where thousands of Hindu people could be baptized at one time, where they'd stand in the water and pour water over themselves in the hope of washing their sins or their karma away. And so it was much of a spiritual atmosphere. And I preached for about an hour, and I could tell, I could sense intuitively that this audience did not comprehend what I said yet. I knew that if I made an invitation, if I gave a call to the altar, that there wouldn't be very many respond. And so I was in a quandary as to what to do. And then all of a sudden, what's called a word of knowledge came to me. And I sensed, I didn't hear an audible voice, but I sensed within myself the voice of the Lord speaking. And I heard him internally tell me to call for the deaf and tell them if what I've preached was true, that every deaf person would hear again. And I was a little nervous, of course, to hinge the night on whether or not deaf people heard again, but I knew it was from the Lord. I didn't know how important it was. I probably would not be alive tonight if I had, or during this program, I would not be alive if I had not responded to God that night. Uh, so anyway, I went ahead and put all out the challenge, and they brought 7 deaf people. 4 of them were totally deaf, 3 were deaf in one ear. And I started to pray for one that was totally deaf. He was about a 23-year-old young man who had been deaf for 5 years, and laid my hands on his ears because the Bible said, lay hands on the sick and they shall recover. And I am not a cessationist. I believe that everything God did in the New Testament, he still does. The gifts of the Spirit were never outdated after the first century. And what the Holy Spirit did then, the Holy Spirit does now. He hasn't changed. God is the same to 1,000 generations. But anyway, as I was praying for this person to receive his hearing, I heard a horrible sound behind me. I found out what it was a little later. These Hindu radicals, a group of 6 of them, had climbed up the stairwell behind the platform, and there was a big, about a 20-foot high gate that was supposed to prevent break ins. And there was a big padlock on the gate. Well, they brought a sledgehammer with them and they were banging at that lock. And while I'm trying to pray for this young man, it's distracting all the preachers on the platform. Everyone's wondering what's going on. It's distracting me. And in my mind, I was thinking, I can't afford to be distracted because I've just hinged the salvation of all these people on whether or not this person hears again. And incidentally, when you pray for a miracle like that, you normally have to use an authoritative prayer. I believe it's called the prayer of faith in the Bible. You don't beg God to heal the person. As his representative, you command that person to be healed, to receive your hearing, to receive your sight, to receive uh, deliverance from whatever condition you're praying against. And that's the biblical account we have in the book of Acts. That's the way the apostles prayed. They made an authoritative decree for a person to be healed, which is what I was doing. And all of a sudden, the gate swung open, and I turned around to see what was happening. And these 6 men came running toward me with a very angry look on their faces. I didn't know that their plan was to beat me up publicly and to tie me to the bumper of their car and drag me through the city until I was dead. And I
Wow.
asked them the next day why they wanted to do that to me. And they said, we wanted to discourage missionary activity in our city. I said, well, if you'd done it, I would have been discouraged. If I could have felt anything, would have felt discouragement. But God had the thing so ordered that right when I turned my head to see them running toward me, the man that I was praying for jerked out of my hands and started screaming, I can hear, I can hear. And the
Wow.
crowd went wild with praise toward God and with wonder. And the man who was the head of the Hindu radical group got wide eyed. I did not know again until the next day when I met with him that he was the next door neighbor of the man that just got healed. So he knew it wasn't false. He knew it had to be true. And he walked up and began to test the miracle and shook his head like Indians do and said, this is truly a miracle, and called all of his men over, and they began testing by whispering in his ear and having him repeat it back. And I falsely assumed that it was a checking committee that was appointed by the pastors to verify the miracles so they would be more believable. And little did I know the truth. And so I prayed for the second person. And after the second person was healed, I asked the checking committee, or what I assumed was a checking committee, to verify that healing too. And they whispered in that person's ears and they repeated it back. And all 7 people got healed. And I gave an invitation, and about 500 Hindu people came forward to give their lives to the Lord, including the 6 men that came to beat me up and murder me that night. And so it was an amazing thing. And I was told, I don't know this for sure, I'm 90% sure, that years later, that Kumbakonam became a center of Christian outreach because the 700 Club built a studio there. And so God did something very profound to tear down a stronghold in that city that I believe resulted in an outbreak of revival, and churches were formed as a result.